Attacks on Pokrovsk are intensifying. Slovakia was finally persuaded, and the EU has adopted a new package of sanctions against Russia. Today is Friday, July 18th, and the 1+1 channel is broadcasting as part of the joint marathon. And now, the TCH team will tell you about the results of the 1,241st day of the full-scale war. Explosions during the air raid alert have already been heard in Poltava, Dnipro, and Zaporizhia. That's according to local social media groups. The consequences are still being clarified. The Russians killed 5 people and wounded 16 in Donetsk region. In the morning, they dropped 3 aerial bombs on Kostyumtynivka. There is 1 dead and 1 injured there. In Rodinsk, a drone struck an evacuation vehicle. 2 people were wounded. Sari, the driver, and 2 pensioners were injured. Kramatorsk was shelled by drones. 6 city residents were injured. There are wounded in Pokrovsk, Myrnhrad, and Andrivka. The war criminals also struck the Stepnohorsk community with guided aerial bombs. That's in the Zaporizhia region. A man was killed there, and another person was wounded. In Andrivka, 9 shahids were also launched at dawn. Fires broke out in the Zaporizhia district. The Russians are shelling the Kherson region with drones. In the morning, in Velitinsk, a man riding a bicycle was killed. And in the village of Zanivniki, an ambulance was attacked by a drone. 2 medics were wounded. At dawn, the car of the chief rabbi of Kherson was also fired upon. He and his family were not harmed. A resident of Izium was wounded by the occupiers in the Kharkiv region. They struck Chuy with drones. Apartment buildings and a lyceum were damaged. There are 3 people injured as a result of the drone attack in Sumy. Today, around 1 in the afternoon and again an hour later, Russian drones attacked the city's civilian infrastructure. The wounded, suffering from shrapnel injuries, were hospitalized. There are power outages in the city.
Today, our city was attacked by a drone again. It was a strike on a non-residential building. The drone was packed with shrapnel to inflict maximum harm on people.
2 people have been killed and already 12 wounded in the Dnipropetrovsk region. There, the occupiers attacked the Kamyansk district with shahids. A man and a woman who were passing by the site of the attack died on the spot. Most of the injured have been hospitalized. A 29-year-old woman is in serious condition. The rest are in moderate condition. A fire broke out, which has already been extinguished. The blast wave and shrapnel damaged a huge area around the impact site. In particular, an administrative building, shops, cars, and dozens of houses were damaged. And twice in one day, the enemy attacked the Pridniprovska railway with drones. The locomotive engineer was killed, and his assistant was wounded. They targeted the locomotive, which was transporting civilian cargo. There are also casualties from the drone attack in the Pavlorad district. At the same time, the enemy is increasing pressure on Pokrovsk, amassing troops and trying to encircle the city. So the front has moved closer to Pokrovsk again. And in the area of the town of Rodinsk, the occupiers have made gains in their advance. Likewise, they are getting even closer to the city and the village of Shevchenkov. That's to the southwest of Pokrovsk. The number of attacks is also increasing on the settlements along the highway connecting Pokrovsk and Kostyumtynivka. There, the occupiers have pushed through in the area of the village of Yablonivka towards Kostyumtynivka. They are also trying to encircle the city from the south, near the village of Delivka. The situation is no less difficult toward the border with Dnipropetrovsk region. There, the Russians are pushing our defensive line further west, ever closer to the administrative border of the regions. In the Kharkiv region, the situation is a bit more stable. The fighting there is not as intense as in Donetsk region. The hottest spots are around Kupiansk and Borova. But the enemy has not achieved any significant success. One of the most powerful packages since the beginning of the war. In Brussels, the 18th package of sanctions against Russia has been approved. It targets the Russian energy sector, the financial sector, and finally bans the return to operation of the Nord Stream gas pipelines. After Slovakia lifted its veto, the EU ambassadors were finally able to approve the document. And now, Brussels is already reporting that they are preparing the next, that is, the 19th package. See what restrictions are included in the current package in the report by TSN correspondent Natalia Fibrik.
We are cutting the Kremlin's budget even more. is how the EU High Representative Kaja Kallas commented on the new sanctions package. In Brussels, this package was also called the strongest of all those imposed against Russia since the start of the full-scale war. The main focus is to reduce Russia's income from energy exports. The European Union has also completely banned all transactions related to the Nord Stream gas pipeline. Both branches of the pipeline are actually damaged and are not currently in use. However, even if they are theoretically repaired, Moscow will not receive any money from their operation. The price cap on Russian oil has been lowered from $60 to $47.60 per barrel. 105 tankers from the Shadow Fleet have also been added to the sanctions list. Another 22 Russian banks, including 2 Chinese ones that helped circumvent previous sanctions, have been disconnected from SWIFT and are now subject to a complete ban on transactions.
The Nord Stream gas pipelines will be banned, and the upper price limit for oil will be lowered. We are increasing pressure on Russia's military industry, on Chinese banks that help circumvent sanctions, and we are blocking the export of technologies used in unmanned aerial vehicles.
The package was only adopted after a compromise was reached. Slovakia lifted its veto in exchange for guarantees that its economy would not suffer in the event of a full gas embargo. The European Commission estimates the potential losses to the Russian budget at billions of euros. France and Germany welcomed the approval of the new sanctions package. This will hinder Russia's ability to wage war, wrote German Chancellor Friedrich Merz on social media. And French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot emphasized that the new restrictions are aimed at depriving the Kremlin of the resources that allow it to finance its aggression against Ukraine.
This support, in particular, includes the continued supply of weapons so that Ukraine can defend itself, as well as the introduction of tougher economic sanctions against Russia to deprive it of the resources that enable it to finance its aggression. I am pleased that this morning a large-scale sanctions package was adopted, the toughest since 2022.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky thanked the European Union and called for the continuation of the sanctions offensive. Meanwhile, in Brussels, work is already underway on the 19th sanctions package. Meanwhile, in the coming weeks, Kyiv is set to receive additional Patriot air defense systems. This was announced the day before, on Thursday, by German Chancellor Merz at a joint press conference with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
I am very grateful that President Trump has once again recently expressed his willingness to continue supporting Ukraine with weapons. In the past few days, we have reached an agreement that we, the European continent, and Europe as a whole, will provide Ukraine with new Patriot systems, and then these systems will be replaced by the United States. After all, we also need to maintain our own defense capabilities. I assume that at this moment, agreements are being made between the defense ministers to technically ensure this.
We're actually talking about systems that are already deployed in Europe. They are to be transferred to Ukraine, and the United States will provide replacements from its own stockpiles. The Chancellor of Germany also confirmed that Ukraine should receive long-range weapons in the very near future, and he said that this would be on a large scale. From Berlin, Natalia Fibrik and Denis Sobchenko, TSN 1+1, Marathon United News.
And regarding sanctions, particularly the 18th package from the EU and what makes it painful for the occupiers, we will discuss this further with Vladislav Vlasic, advisor and authorized representative of the President on sanctions policy. We have him connected to the TSN studio. Good evening, and thank you for joining us.
Yes, you do have me on the line. Good evening.
Mr. Vladislav, so the Slovaks were convinced, and the package was adopted. It includes a lower price cap on oil, sanctions against tankers, the Shadow Fleet, and certain sectoral sanctions. In your opinion, how effective is all of this? How hard is it to circumvent all of this? And what effect is Ukraine expecting? Will this significantly undermine Russia's ability to keep investing in killing?
This is one of the best packages from the European Union in recent times. Why? Because, first of all, it really includes some major things. For example, Nord Stream, finally cutting off support from the Nord Stream pipeline, if you remember. Right now, it's not operating, essentially due to a decisive decision by Germany, and that's that. And secondly, something many people didn't believe would happen, the lowering of the oil price cap. Moreover, the model they've come up with will allow for relatively painless further reductions. So it's a dynamic model for reviewing the oil price cap. You take the oil market price over 3 months, subtract 15%, and that's your price cap. So even if the oil price keeps dropping on the markets, the price cap will still decrease and keep working. Plus, the UK has already announced today that it is joining the price cap. Basically, that leaves the US and Japan. Japan probably won't be against it, but I think they'll wait to see the US position. The US, of course, is a more complicated story, but I believe that, just like the other members of the Group of Seven, they will join the price cap. After all, it should be beneficial for the Americans themselves. This is one of those things Trump has been talking about from the very beginning. What's also interesting about this 18th sanctions package from the European Union is that, for the first time, and this is quite an aggressive move, the European Union has sanctioned Chinese financial institutions. So, in addition to the 22 banks from the Russian Federation that ended up on the sanctions list, 2 Chinese banks were also sanctioned, and we know that for a very long time after these banks appeared on the previous list, this was back in May, China put in a lot of work and effort to prevent sanctions from being imposed on its own financial institutions. Nevertheless, it happened. This is a major aggressive move, and we hope it sends a very clear signal to China regarding its future prospects for cooperation and access to the European Union market. So it seems that this package should be quite significant in terms of its impact, sending the right signals and immediately producing certain economic effects, particularly regarding the price cap. Plus, they have additionally banned imports to the Russian Federation of goods worth approximately another $2.5 billion. Mostly, these are all things that are used or could be used in the defense sector and defense industry in one way or another. And the best part is that everyone clearly understands that even this is not enough. There has already been a lot of communication with Brussels today, and all of it was very much the same. Well, finally, we've adopted the 18th package. Let's get to work. Let's start working on the 19th. And basically, we're already planning to share our first ideas about what could be included in the next 19th sanctions package literally this weekend.
And then, if I may clarify, because indeed the Europeans dealt with the 18th and immediately got to work on the 19th. And in one of your posts, you wrote that there can never be too many sanctions for Russia. So, what restrictions will Ukraine primarily discuss with its international partners? Where, in your opinion, should a blow be struck where, for one reason or another, the EU has not yet done so?
In June, Russia earned its lowest, or second lowest, oil dollar income since the start of the full-scale invasion. But that amount is still $12 billion. So, for comparison, the projected annual budget deficit of Ukraine for next year is $16 billion. That's what Russia earns from oil exports in almost a month. That's why we believe there is still a huge potential to deprive Russia of these surplus funds, which, in our opinion, are unnecessary. And for this to work, including for the lowered oil price cap to be effective, we think it's necessary to move further in the direction of infrastructure. So, if right now only the Shadow Fleet, its vessels, and a few captains of the Shadow Fleet are under sanctions, then next we need to move towards targeting maritime terminals, ports, shipping companies, and, in fact, the captains of the Shadow Fleet. All of this will continue to force Russia, if it trades oil at all, to do so only at a low price, and as a result, they will earn much less. And of course, the second priority remains the military-industrial complex. That is, all these spare parts, microelectronics, and critical materials that continue to reach Russia from abroad, a significant portion of which comes specifically from China. And this is what then ends up as components of Russian weapons. And this is what then destroys our infrastructure. So this is the second major area that we continue to work on. And likewise, there are some very concrete ideas. What else can we do?
Lastly, I'd like to briefly get your reaction to their reaction, because some of the occupiers have already commented on the topic of sanctions. There's actually a very wide range of statements there, from claims that the country has already gotten used to it and supposedly nothing scares them anymore, to outright threats. Medvedev basically wrote that in response to the sanctions, Ukraine and Kiev will be shelled even more. How would you comment on all these statements?
I don't think anyone cares about the opinion of an alcoholic. And in terms of real impact on the economy, well, let them take a look at their own economic indicators. They're seeing collapses in most sectors of their economy that aren't related to defense. So today they're showing us statistics, in particular, minus 30% when it comes to housing being put into operation. A 30% drop is a very clear indicator of the population's ability to buy anything. The same goes for the purchase of passenger cars, or if we look at aviation. In 4 years, they haven't built a single civilian aircraft. That's the extent of their capabilities. That's their whole economy. At the same time, we shouldn't underestimate them. They still retain significant capabilities in their military-industrial complex. And this is our major goal, where we need to reduce their capabilities.
Thank you for taking part in this broadcast. Vladislav Vlasic, advisor and authorized representative of the President on sanctions policy, joined the TSN studio to discuss the 18th package of EU restrictions and the possible consequences of these sanctions. Time magazine has dedicated its cover to Ukrainian children who were abducted by Russia. According to the publication, since the beginning of the war, about 1,200 children abducted by the aggressor country have been returned to their homeland. More than 19,000 still need to be returned by the Kremlin. As Time writes, about 1,600,000 Ukrainian children live in territories temporarily occupied by Russia, where they are influenced by Kremlin propagandists. Children who have been taken to the occupier's country are lost in the paperwork, given entirely new surnames, and handed over to be raised by propagandist families. So the longer they stay there, the harder it is to bring them back home. Meanwhile, demographic statistics have been calculated in Ukraine, and the results are discouraging. For every newborn, there are 3 deaths. In the past 6 months, nearly 87,000 children have been born in the country, while the number of deaths is approaching 250,000. The experts' data is discouraging. In the last 10 years, the birth rate in Ukraine has decreased by 2.2 times. If in 2016, on average, 32,000 children were born each month, this year it's only 14,000. This is according to data from the Open Data Bot platform. The special tribunal that will consider the crime of Russian aggression against Ukraine has moved from being just an idea to becoming a real undertaking. This week, Parliament ratified the agreement with the Council of Europe regarding its establishment. So, what are the next steps? When can we expect the court to appear in The Hague, and who will it judge? TSN correspondent Natalia Yarmala looked into it.
Ukraine has come one step closer to launching the special tribunal. This week, Parliament unanimously ratified the agreement with the Council of Europe on its establishment. The next step is to adopt changes to our laws and sign an expanded agreement with the participating countries. The President is asking for this to be done urgently to speed up the creation of the court. Anton Karinovic, Director of the Department of International Law at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, told TSN.
Now all our efforts will be focused on the third element of the package, the establishment of the Governing Committee of the Special Tribunal. The Governing Committee will be something like an assembly of states parties, where all the countries that wish to support the Special Tribunal will be represented. That is, it will no longer be just between 2 entities, as is currently the case with the agreement between Ukraine and the Council of Europe, but rather a multilateral mechanism. And accordingly, the Governing Committee will be responsible for all matters of administration and financing of the Special Tribunal's work.
Immediately after this, practical steps will be taken, selecting premises in The Hague, recruiting staff, judges, prosecutors, and cases for the top criminals of the aggressor country. More than 40 countries are involved in this process, and not just from the European Union. But as for when exactly the tribunal will be fully staffed and begin its practical work, Anton Karinovic is not rushing to name specific dates.
The sooner, the better. We hope that this won't take much time and that we'll complete this stage within a reasonable time frame. We are now seeing the political will of our partner countries to move forward on this issue. I think that we will also get through this next, final stage quite quickly and efficiently.
There hasn't been a tribunal like this since Nuremberg, when the Nazi leadership was put on trial. Until now, no dictator or their accomplices have ever been held accountable for the crime of aggression, that is, for the very decision to start a war and cross the Ukrainian border. This court will be able to begin its work without waiting for the fighting at the front to end, and will be able to try the criminals in absentia. And not just Russians, but also individuals from other countries involved in the aggression. There could be around 20 such people. The final number of defendants will be determined by the tribunal's judges. However, this court is not able to bypass the so-called immunity of the trio, the head of state, the head of government, and the foreign minister. This means that while crimes committed by Putin, Lavrov, and Mishulin can be investigated, they cannot be prosecuted as long as they hold their positions. Human rights advocate Alexandra Romantsova is convinced even just investigating their crimes is a powerful political blow.
It cannot officially conclude and press formal charges, but it can indeed conduct a thorough public investigation and clearly show that yes, we have definitively proven this particular point, this specific aspect, and this crucial element, and that comprehensive demonstration can significantly help us in our broader political interactions and engagements. And the legal focus, well, the legal endpoint will come when he leaves that position.
But Putin's criminals, officials, generals, and propagandists have no immunity whatsoever. So The Hague is already waiting for them. Natalia Yarmola, Volodymyr Ostapenko, TSN, 1+1, Marathon, United News.
And now about the guest who was like air defense. This week, Keith Kellogg visited Ukraine. The visit of the special representative of American President Trump was announced as a week-long one. But Kellogg stayed in Kiev for 4 days and became the subject of countless memes on social media. People joked that Kellogg himself was like American air defense for Ukraine, because during his stay, the nights in Kiev were relatively quiet. No long air raid alerts, no bombings, no drone attacks. Even Volodymyr Zelensky made a joke about this in one of his interviews. He admitted that people had advised him to give the American a Ukrainian passport and keep him in Kiev to protect the city from Russian missiles. Yuri Anap, the spokesperson for the Air Force, also commented on the calm in the Ukrainian skies. He noted that, indeed, there were no massive attacks during Chito Kellogg's visit, but it's too early to relax, as Kiev remains a top priority target for the enemy. And this week, specifically on Monday, Trump issued a new ultimatum to Putin. The countdown started precisely from July 14th. Unlike previous warnings from the American president, who usually gave the Russian dictator 2 weeks, this time he set a 50-day deadline for Russia to reach a peace agreement or a ceasefire against Ukraine. Our TSN international correspondent Jana Siserchuk has gathered all the facts and is finding out exactly what Trump offered Europe and how he is trying to outplay Putin.
We have collected all of Putin's ultimatums.
In about a week, or perhaps in 2 weeks, or even in 2 to 3 weeks, approximately 2 weeks from now, around 2 weeks.
And we're figuring out how the latest one is different from the others.
We will impose very tough tariffs if there is no peace agreement within 50 days.
What kind of tariffs are these? I'll explain in a minute. Cautious dissatisfaction with the long deadline of Putin's latest ultimatum is spreading across Europe, especially against the backdrop of the drawn-out discussion of the 18th package of European sanctions against the Kremlin.
I'm convinced that the 50 days announced by Trump are too long. September 2nd is too late.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has taken on the mission of deciphering Trump's words. It was after a meeting with him that the American president announced the ultimatum.
In 50 days, he will impose secondary sanctions on countries like India, China, and Brazil. So I strongly urge these 3 specific countries. If you are in charge of them, you should pay close attention, because this could hit you very hard. Please call Putin. Tell him to take peace talks seriously. Otherwise, this will hit you massively.
50 days. That's almost 2 months. The deadline is unpleasant, but not unacceptable, if you don't take into account that this is far from the first deadline Trump has set for Putin this year. So far, Putin has consistently ignored them, seeing time and again that there are no consequences. It started on April 24th after yet another massive Russian attack on Kiev with ballistic missiles and drones. By that time, Trump and Putin had already had several phone conversations. The Americans and the Russians had met in Saudi Arabia. That didn't help, so Trump addresses the Kremlin leader through his social network.
I am dissatisfied with the Russian strikes on Kiev. It was unnecessary and very poorly timed. Vladimir, stop. 5,000 soldiers are dying every week. Let's make a peace deal.
Will you consider additional sanctions against Russia? What will you do if Putin doesn't want to talk?
I'd answer that question in a week. I want to see if we have a deal. Right now, there's no reason to answer, but I won't be happy. I'll say this, something will happen.
Why are you putting more pressure on Russia?
I'm putting a lot of pressure. You can't even imagine how much pressure I'm putting on Russia.
However, Russia still hasn't agreed to a peace deal. A few days later, Trump gives Putin another 2 or 3 weeks to think it over.
Do you trust Putin?
I'll tell you in 2 weeks.
Since then, every 2 or 3 weeks, Putin is given another 2 or 3 weeks. This was on May 16th, during a trip to the Emirates.
I'll tell you, the world is already a much safer place now. And I think that in 2 or 3 weeks, we'll be able to make it a much, much safer place.
This was on May 19th.
I'd rather tell you in 2 weeks. For now, I can't say yes or no.
This was on May 28th.
I won't tell you that, but we'll find out in about 2 weeks. We'll find out very soon. We'll see if he wants to cooperate or not. And if not, then we'll have to act differently.
The pause dragged on for a month and a half. During this time, Ukraine got used to the fact that after every conversation between Trump and Putin, another massive shelling with civilian casualties was to be expected. And the destruction of residential buildings. The American president is starting to realize, it seems, that Putin doesn't respect him as much as he would like. Even his wife tells him this.
I come home and say to the First Lady, I spoke with Vladimir today. We had a wonderful conversation. And she's like, oh really? Another city just got bombed.
Against the backdrop of the flattering Mark Rutte, who was enthusiastically telling everyone in the Oval Office how talented a negotiator the American president is and how Putin should now be afraid of him, the reaction of the EU's chief diplomat was rather cool.
On the one hand, it's very good that Donald Trump wants to put more pressure on Russia. On the other hand, 50 days is a very long time, because we see that Russia is killing innocent people.
Trump himself, of course, doesn't see it that way.
Why are you giving Putin an extra 50 days to wage war in Ukraine?
I don't think 50 days is very long, and it could even be faster. I don't think 50 days is very long. Those are the kinds of questions Biden should be asked.
This is not my war. Trump has repeated dozens of times since he was elected president of the United States for the second time. And he always adds,
if I were president, this war wouldn't have happened.
But to the usual accusations against his predecessor Biden, a new note has been added, a grudge against Putin. That's how strategic ambiguity works in the hands of the most unpredictable president of modern times. Just a few hours after these words, several newspapers, starting with the Financial Times, reported that in a conversation with Zelensky, Trump directly asked whether he could strike Moscow and St. Petersburg. And Zelensky supposedly replied, "Give us the weapons and we'll hit them." It got to the point where the White House spokesperson had to say, no, Trump did not encourage Kiev to strike Moscow. But this is a signal that the Kremlin will interpret completely differently than how it sounds publicly. By allowing the discussion to go public about whether he did or did not tell Zelensky to strike Moscow, Trump says on camera, no.
Should Zelensky focus more on Moscow or go deeper into Russia?
No, he should not target Moscow.
But first of all, he doesn't say anything about strikes deep inside Russia. Secondly, he doesn't deny that such discussions might have taken place. Trump's relationship with Putin has always been personal. He can't allow himself to be outplayed in public because he already almost sees himself holding the Nobel Peace Prize for stopping that very foreign war. For obvious reasons, Ukrainian military officials do not comment on the quantity, content, or speed of the supplies. William Taylor, former ambassador to Kiev and now an analyst at the Atlantic Council, offers his own version of why the new Patriots could quickly end up in Ukraine.
It seems that what President Trump and the NATO Secretary General were talking about is that European countries have their own Patriots, and these Patriots can be transferred to Ukraine fairly quickly. After that, the Europeans will buy replacements for themselves from American manufacturers. This will help deliver the systems to Ukraine quite quickly.
Because speed is the most important thing here.
I'm Vasyl Zarchuk, Hennedy Shula, Victoria Pismena. TSN 1+1.